Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning. I am publishing this at the beginning of 2026, and today's conversation is one parents and educators have been quietly craving. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Ellen Braaten, a clinical psychologist, faculty member at Harvard Medical School, and one of the most trusted voices on motivation, learning, and emotional development in children and adolescents. Many of you already know her from Bright Kids Who Couldn't Care Less, and today we're diving into her newest work, the Motivation Mindset Workbook, a deeply practical, developmentally grounded guide for helping tweens and teens reconnect with purpose, engagement, and confidence. As a neuropsychologist, I see every day how often lack of motivation is really a signal of overwhelm, misalignment, or lost identity. Join me in welcoming Dr. Braaten to the podcast.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Dr. Braaten, welcome to the podcast again.
I love being here.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that you are here and so excited to talk to you once again. It seems like every time I talk to you, it's about a different topic, but equally important, from slow processing speed to motivation. And now we get to talk about this amazing workbook that you wrote. And can I just say, I love this workbook.
I'm so happy. I'm so happy. You know, my co-author, Dr. Hillary Bush, and I had a lot of fun putting this together because it's like, how do we get people to do the things that we talk about? And that's what we tried to do.
Yes. And I think one of the things that I remember is that you open the workbook by making this bold but validating point. Unmotivated kids don't fit into a single diagnostic box. They're not just anxious or depressed or distracted. They're often all of it or none of it. And I wonder what made you feel it was important to move away from that deficit-based explanation of motivation.
Well, to be honest, you know, you were talking before about how, like, I have these different topics but for me, it's really been a very clear arc from, like, I was an ADHD researcher and noticed this thing with processing speed and then started looking at that. I was like, oh, processing speed isn't just about attention. It comes across lots of diagnoses. And then I would watch the kids with processing speed go into adulthood, and a lot of them were unmotivated. So I was like, oh, well, wait a minute. This includes lots of different kids again. And then I started this book in 2019, thinking it would be sort of like a follow the other book, not the workbook, but the Bright Kids Who Couldn't Care Less book that this is sort of based on. And in 2019, I thought, well, this is just going to be a kind of a motivation book for kids who have learning differences, you know, atypical neurodevelopmental profiles. And then the pandemic happened, and I realized that a lot of people are unmotivated. So I had to open it up. And really, I've started to think that, you know, all of us suffer from poor motivation at different parts of our life. It's part of being alive, is finding your mojo again. Like, how do I get back into being the person that I want to be or thought I could be? Or so it really is something that affects all of us. I think for those of us who are more vulnerable because of learning challenges or attention issues, it makes it harder sometimes, but I think we're overstressed. We're still kind of coming out of some difficult times. We live in difficult times. And so it's hard to stay motivated.
Yeah. I mean, I see families that come in terrified that their child doesn't care, right? And when what's really happening is some of the things you're talking about. It's cognitive overload, it's emotional fatigue, or repeated failure experiences. And your framing normalizes that experience in a really powerful way.
Yeah, it's just part of the being alive right now at this time. And don't forget, like along with that are just like, we're not getting enough sleep. So when I don't get enough sleep, I'm not going to be motivated that day. And if I chronically don't get enough sleep, I'm just going to be too tired to figure out, what makes me happy.
I talk about that all the time. That's a whole other podcast episode.
I know, I'm not an expert in that. People ask me what we do. There are other people who really study that stuff.
I think I use that. I talk about sleep in almost every talk I give because it impacts everything from mental health to cognitive functioning to attention and focus. You describe motivation as something that ebbs and flows. It's shaped by biology, support systems, and context. How do you help adults unlearn the idea that motivation is a fixed trait? Because if it's fixed, then it can't be changed.
Right. Well, one of the things that I do is to talk about the different kinds of motivation and what motivation consists of. So it's initiation, it's getting started on a task, it's persistence, and then it's also sort of having that fire, that desire, that spark. And so when you think of it in that way, and when you also, sometimes I'll really go into depth about the kinds, what are the ways that we get motivated? Where is, what is motivation? It's the reason why we do what we do. And so if we don't have a reason, if we don't have a purpose, it doesn't just fall from the sky to us. And so we have to think about this as almost like an executive function skill. So initiation is an executive function skill. And so kind of talking about it as a skill set helps them, because you're right. I think it's one of the most frustrating things for a parent to see is a kid who doesn't care. It's frightening. It's hopeless. And as clinicians, we don't always know what to do.
Yes, that's true. It's true. And when you think about it and you frame it that way, initiation, persistence, and intensity, they're not moral qualities. They're brain-based processes that sometimes develop unevenly.
Yes. So you can have that child who's really got great initiation. Like, I can't wait to delve into this topic, but they can't persist because they don't have the skills. They don't have the writing skills to finish the project or whatever it is. And sometimes they don't have the time to do, even if it's not a project, but a time to do, they want to learn something new or have more time to do something. And if they don't have the time to do it, they're not going to be able to persist. So yeah, we have to think about this as a complicated issue that has a lot of ways that we can attack it. It's not hopeless, but it takes time. And it's also can be a really wonderful way of getting engaged as an adult when you've got a teen or tween or, in your life who's unmotivated. It really forces you to kind of think about it for yourself.
Right. And I mean, you talk about tapping into strengths, but you also mentioned identity. And can you talk a little bit about why that's a critical foundation for motivation?
Yeah, I do feel like we live in a time where kids are having trouble figuring out who they are. And I don't mean as a life choice. I mean, when I was in school, it was kind of easy to sort of figure out who you were. Now, not all the choices were great, but like you were a band kid, you were a cheerleader, you were the kid who went out and smoked cigarettes on the hill during lunchtime. But you had an identity for that part of high school, at least. And so for better or worse, like I'm not saying it was perfect, but at least it gave us, we knew these are my kind of people. And I can either choose to make a path for myself to get out of this, so, I grew up in a tiny little town. I was like, I got to get to college because I want out of, I don't want to live in this farm town where everybody works on a farm or a factory and lots of other, so it was easier to sort of figure that out. I think now kids have so many choices at one point. On the other hand, they overly specialize too early. So both of these things, it's like you're unlimited. You can be anyone you want to be, which actually is a lot of pressure because we really can't be. So that makes it harder to kind of figure out. And then when you're in like the whatever the most elite soccer team at age 11, and then that kind of limits your choices in a way. So and then when that doesn't work out, then who are you? So I think we don't think about like, what am I good at? What do I like doing? We just sort of are either filling kids' time or we're, asking to get too involved in something before they're really ready and before they've really figured out who am I?
Right. And that directly connects to the motivation piece because then if you don't hear feedback that you're good at anything, then your motivation just collapses because, okay, I'm not a sports person. I'm not an academics person. Then where's my motivation to persist with those things?
Yeah. And I think you brought up two things, the academics and athletics. And in our culture right now, and in the time of sort of like decreased funding for schools, that's really kind of the only two avenues you've got. And so if you're a kid who is more like a band kid or more of a drama kid or more of a, like chess club or, moot court or whatever it is, you're not getting those opportunities because they're just not there like they used to. So there's a real consequence to not funding other sorts of activities for kids. And you're right. In a lot of schools, if you're not academically gifted or athletically gifted, there's not a lot of space to figure out then who you are.
Right. And that just speaks to not only the funding, but also we have to expand our definition of strengths, right? Beyond academics and sports.
100%. And we do talk about that in the workbook and get ways of getting at that. But that is 100%. We have to think about character. We have to think about other sorts of ways of being in the world that are really wonderful. Like, a strength might be, I'm just really good at caring for other people. I'm good for, or I'm good at working in a job. I'm good at showing up. I'm good at leading. I'm good at taking care of animals. Like there are a million, there's hundreds of other ways of showing up and having a strength. We just don't tend to see kids outside of that very academic, athletic kind of framework.
Right. And it's such a narrow framework as well. And again, that speaks to the need to expand it. One of the most clinically, I think, resonant sections for me in the workbook is how you address uncomfortable emotions like shame, anxiety, and embarrassment as major motivation blockers. Can you talk about that? Because I think that adults see the avoidance, and sometimes it's seen as defiance rather than emotional self-protection.
Yeah, you sort of described it as better than I could even, because that's exactly right. If we feel like I'm at a dead end, or I'm whatever I did didn't work out, or I'm a failure, and it could be something, it can even happen to a kid who's really doing very well. So like, let's say, a child who loves hockey, loves playing it, is even very motivated to do it. So not even one of those kids who over specialize and it's not right, but did and is right. And then all of a sudden has an injury and they lose their peer group. They lose what they love doing and they don't know then how to move on. And so that's, and there may not be shame in that, but there may be regret or frustration we've got to bring that to the forefront, because if what's keeping us is like, I can't, I've only had challenges in my life and people in my world haven't helped me overcome them, or people have helped me and I haven't taken all of those opportunities. And I think there are a lot of, kids when they get into like 14, 15, 16 years old, they realize like, oh my gosh, all those people, those tutors who are around, who are trying to help me and I was not engaged. Now it feels like it's too late. And talking about those things is absolutely essential to kind of get that, clear the air.
Right. And when you think about, again, when you're talking about motivation, and this again ties into everything you've been saying, you break it into initiation, intensity, and persistence. So if parents are seeing these difficulties in motivation, these other areas, what are some strategies that you talk about that can address those?
Yeah. So some of the things, so if we're talking about initiation, is to start to talk about those sorts of, that sort of thing, like what's keeping me from getting started? And we've got some things in the book that sort of talks about that, like why am I getting stuck? And is it a physical issue? Is it a social issue? Is it a cognitive, academic? So am I not getting started because I don't have the support system? I don't have the academic skills. I'm having trouble coming up with ideas. That's just hard for me. Again, it's an executive function skill. Those things that we talk about. In terms of persistence, it's sort of the same thing. So, okay, I've got something, but where am I getting stuck? And so, looking at even rating, kind of looking at, initiation, intensity, and persistence, giving kids those examples. Let's look, where are you getting stuck here? Is it all over, or is it really just in one of these areas? And kind of identifying that for them. So, and that persistence is how long or how not long you take to do these things. And so kind of thinking about that and helping kids figure that out. And that can also be very helpful to know that, once I get a topic, I can stick with it, but my heart is coming up with it. That already frees them all up. Okay, well, where I need the help is with coming up, or vice versa. So identifying these things and demystifying, because motivation seems so overwhelming. It's like this huge gray cloud, and kind of making it clear just makes it all work.
Right. And I think those distinctions are going to be so helpful to parents, because a child who can start but can't sustain effort needs a different support plan than a child who can persist once started, but then just can't initiate.
Exactly. And I think that that's where, again, just making this so clear and thinking about that. And also, what are the kinds of motivators that work for each one of those kinds of situations. So yeah, it can, and it could free up a parent too, to know that, once I get him started, he's going to be okay. Or to say, oh, he gets started, but then he just peters out. And then, I know that's going to be tough for him. How do I get ahead of that game before it gets to be too late?
Right. And this is going to kind of touch on the sleep issue that we just mentioned, but you're very clear that motivation doesn't exist in isolation. It's shaped by sleep, by stress, by technology use, anxiety, parent and teacher expectations. And it sounds like changing one environmental factor that interferes with motivation can go a long way for parents.
Completely. I mean, it just changed any one of those that you just mentioned. It's going to change a bit. Like, if we start to get more sleep, it's like, oh, I'm ready to tackle the day, as opposed to, oh, yeah. And I think that those, a lot of this comes too from what we expect our kids to be and who we expect them to be, and what the trajectory is towards college. And so we get sort of stuck as adults in sort of this one size fits all, and sort of forgets that there are all these other components that are important.
I think that when we keep asking kids to try harder, we're not recognizing, these other external factors that play a role, particularly when they have a depleted nervous system because of either chronic stress or not getting enough sleep or sleep deprivation. These are like what you call, like, they're silent motivation killers.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think, the worst thing we can do to say to anybody who's trying as hard as they can is try harder. And so, even though they don't seem like they're trying as hard as they can, they're struggling. And a lot of them are trying as hard as they can, and they just don't know how. So.
And that's where knowing what kinds of support kids need is so important, because I think many parents worry about either doing too much, and now they're like not letting their kids' brains grow and develop and to learn how to do the things on their own, or they're doing too little. So it's hovering versus disengaging. What does a supportive involvement actually look like?
Well, I think hovering versus disengaging, I think I get this question a lot. And it's really, what you have to do is you want to make sure you are in that sweet spot of making sure you can't disengage when you've got a child who doesn't have the supports in place, the materials they need, and the actual aptitude they need to do the task. So that's the first thing you want to really look at. Can my child do the task they're being asked, or I'm expecting of them? Do they have the supports they need in order to get that, whether it's emotional support, time, and do they have the equipment to do that too? And do they know where that is, and all of those things. So I think you've got to, because I think parents oftentimes go between one or the other, that anxious hovering, or I'm done. And oftentimes we get it, we sort of, not we, you and me, but, like just society gets in the way. You've just got to let them go, let them fail. And it's not that easy either. So I think you can let them fail once like, listen, you've got this. I see this. And to tell a child this, I think you do have the skills. And if you don't, you should tell me what you feel like you don't have. You've got the time, you've got this. And, I'm going to leave it up to you. And that at that point, you're really empowering them to take this over. Now, they still might fail, and that's okay. And that's when you say, I thought you had this You had this, but you didn't. What was I missing? What were you missing for next time? And not be afraid of that kind of failure. The sort of failure that's so devastating is when you didn't have it all together. And then when you were talking before about the guilt and the shame, you've got the guilt on the side of the parent. I didn't know my child had ADHD, for example, or whatever. I didn't know they were having trouble. Or, on the other hand, a child feeling bad that they, were expected to do something that they felt like they really weren't able to do.
In your workbook, you really position adults as collaborators rather than enforcers, which I think is such an important distinction as well, because motivation grows in relationship with others.
Completely. We are motivated to please others. We are connected with other creatures. And so it is vitally important to be there to have that relationship, to have the person motivating you and believing in you. And all of that is really important. I kind of lost track of what I think the question wasn't quite that, but I just feel like it's so important to remember that what really gets us up in the morning is our connections with other humans. That, I really feel like that COVID still, a lot of us aren't back in the office all the time, or even, people like you and me, we still do some of our work on Zoom, and it's not as connected as it was. I mean, it's easier in some ways, but it's harder in others. So we're trying to find a new normal, I think.
Right. And I think students and, children and teens are also spending more time on devices rather than face to face. And that's, the relationship is different, texting someone versus sitting beside them and having a conversation.
Absolutely. And even for us, if we see a child in therapy or for some kind of session and it's on Zoom, it's not quite the same. And, maybe it allows us to be more consistent with therapy, or there are benefits and negatives, but I think that we are a little bit less connected face to face and a little bit less, the only word I'm coming up with is aggressive in getting out there. We're invited to parties and not everybody shows anymore. And it's interesting that we've gotten a little lazy about that, or it's just become too easy to disengage.
And I think that's actually connected to the motivation. It's the motivation to interact with people in real life. I think that's an issue that's impacting a lot of folks, particularly post-COVID.
Yes. And I think part of it is, anxiety and, I think the things that we were all sort of vulnerable in before the pandemic have just kind of like simmered in the background. So, if you've struggled with anxiety a little bit, and it's kind of easy to not go, like, we all use for a couple of years, I may have COVID, I had an exposure, so I can't come. And so I think, and it's totally, the thing is, it's not just related to motivation. It's sort of like a cycle. So if you don't go to that party, you're less likely to be motivated by the people that you might meet at that party, by you're hearing their stories or having them reinforce you and who you are and what you're doing. So it's a cycle that we should stop if we can.
You've written a workbook, but you also note that kids rarely pick up a workbook on motivation by themselves. How do you most hope this book will be used, and how?
Great question. So when we started this, we really were like, we are writing a workbook for kids. And then we just kept realizing, we were even working with our, editor and publisher, and that was our plan. And then we're like, they're not going to pick up this book. Like,
right.
The activities are written as if it's first person child. But where we really see them being used is in therapy, is in classrooms. So parents ask me a lot, what can I do? And, maybe they're not going to pick up and say, like, I just kind of opened the book to a page here. I wish my parents knew. So this is one activity. I wish my parents knew, and it says oftentimes there are things that kids wish their parents knew or understood about them. Take a moment and think about the things you wish your parents understood about you. And so, we give them some prompts, like what my life is like when I'm with my friends, what it's like for me when I'm doing homework. This doesn't necessarily have to be done in a worksheet form, but a parent can use that as a way of starting a conversation.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, if you're in therapy, if you and I are doing a session with a child, we can sort of say, let's talk about this. I'm going to jot some of these down for you. Because again, a lot of kids don't really want to be writing this stuff down in a workbook, but I can jot some of these down for you. Let's see. And, you can share this with your parent. But if you're a parent, you really could pick this up and say, you could look at some of these things and say, let's use this as a conversation starter. And then there are other things like, taking stock of your activities that you can really say, pick up the worksheet and say, let's look at the activities you're doing this semester and let's rate them. What's your aptitude like on this? Is it high? What's your pleasure like in this? And how much time do you really want to spend doing this? So there are activities like that in there that really lends itself to sort of like analyzing what's going on in your life. So there's a range, but I see, parents, teachers, and therapists using it.
This is really great. I think that the workbook does something really rare. It gives adults a way to help without shaming, without pushing, and without pathologizing. And it gives kids language for understanding themselves at a moment when their own self-doubt can be really loud at times, particularly for tweens and teens.
Yeah. And, you started this conversation talking about identity, and that's really the whole task of the teens and tweens is, who am I? Starting to figure out like what are the parts of me that are important, and who do I want to show how I am to the world? And so that is, our ultimate motivator, and also motivation is so critical for that. So it's sort of like two sides of the same coin.
Ellen, I'm going to put a link to this workbook in the show notes because I think that, our listeners, everybody's going to want to pick up a copy, but listeners may want to know more about this topic. They want to know more about all of the connections you've made with slow processing speed, or want to connect with you. What is the best way for them to connect?
So the best source of information is my website, which is ellenbraatenphd.com. And so there are a lot of links there to things that I've written and other even articles. So that's the best place for them to go.
Wonderful. And I will put a link to that in the show notes. I can't thank you enough for being here and for writing this book, because it's really forcing conversation, and it's not about forcing engagement, right? It's really about helping kids rediscover who they are, what matters to them, and how to move forward when motivation feels stuck. And so thank you so much for this book.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I love talking to you. We could talk all day.
We could.
I'm just thrilled to be here. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. A link to the Motivation Mindset Workbook is going to be in the show notes, so make sure you check it out, as well as information about where you can reach out to Dr. Braaten. And the Motivation Mindset Workbook isn't about forcing engagement. It's about helping kids rediscover who they are, what matters to them, and how to move forward when motivation feels stuck. For parents, educators, and clinicians listening, this is a tool you'll return to again and again. Trust me. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.